there are hundreds, there are thousands of Catholics who in the last 6 months, 12 months, 2 years are rediscovering Catholic tradition. And it's not just the traditional Latin Mass, it's traditional devotions like the Rosary, like novenas, like benediction of the Blessed Sacrament, spiritual direction, mental prayer. And today I want to do a different show. I've invited my friend Chad Judice to come on the show, and he's a guy who has spent years learning Catholicism in a heroic way. And not only is he a guy who studies and is into it, but I know from his personal life, he's a saintly man. He's a good man. He's a good father. And this is really the synthesis of what we're looking for. Yes, we want to form our head. We have to form our heart. And that's a synthesis that we all need to strive for. And I think, as you're going to see today, Chad is one of those guys. And so I've invited Chad on. Chad, welcome. Glad to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Marshall. It's a privilege to be here today.
So Chad has been, I've known Chad for, I guess you've been studying at the New St. Thomas Institute since 2014. You've done all 9 curricula, all 9 certificate, and you written in and said, hey, I finished everything. And whenever I hear about that, whenever I hear someone who's done everything at the New St. Thomas Institute, I want to talk to him because that's my goal. That's like the number one student, someone who does everything. And so Chad and I got on the phone, and we've spoken before, we've corresponded before, but we got on the phone and we talked about Catholic studies and Catholic theology and Catholic tradition and your background. And, you know, we agreed, hey, I think it'd be really cool for you to come on and talk about your journey. So if you could just sit, quickly and, 5-10 minutes, kind of give your background, how you found the traditional Latin Mass, tradition, Thomas Aquinas, scholasticism, theology. Let us know.
Sure. So to answer that question in the shortest way possible, because it's been quite a journey for the past 12 to 13 years. I had a tremendous thing happen in my life in the middle of my teaching career. I taught for 17 years in Catholic education, all in Catholic schools and diocesan schools. And for the first 9 or so years of my teaching career, I was in a American history and a civics classroom because that's what my background was in when I graduated from college. And I had this tremendous thing happen in my life we'll talk about later on in the show that drove me very deep into my Catholic faith. And I would call it a reversion. I've been a Catholic my whole life, but I guess you could call it an actual conversion. I had been a Piccadilly Catholic most of my life. I thought it was a buffet and not an all-inclusive meal. And I found out later on that that wasn't the case. So my journey started there. And I started sharing that experience with people. And it led me into apologetics because I was sharing the journey in front of people that were not necessarily Catholic. Maybe they came from other Christian denominations, and they had lots of questions about things like you spoke of earlier. The Rosary is mentioned in my presentation, devotion to the communion of saints, intercession of saints. So I decided to go and move into a theology classroom, and I had a former principal at a new school that gave me an opportunity to do that. And I was praying to the Blessed Mother, who I have a devotion to. I've been praying the Rosary every day. I love your thing every day when you say, hey, everybody, if you're not on the team, if you don't pray the Rosary. And I just asked her to ask Jesus to lead me to the fullness of truth. Because if I was standing in front of young people who I was going to be forming their souls for salvation, I just wanted it to be completely authentically Catholic. And I stumbled upon one of your webinars. And I want to say it was one where you were discussing either a Marian dogma or maybe one of the private revelations or apparitions, might have been Our Lady of Guadalupe. Yep. And there was an offer to join the St. Thomas Institute, the new St. Thomas Institute. So I jumped in immediately because I was really enjoying the content. And the minute I got in there and I started teaching theology, I realized that this is what I needed to reach the kids that were in front of me, because I saw a lot of the philosophical misconceptions that a lot of people who are opposed to the faith use to try to, subtly get people to abandon it. Right. And the first thing that struck me was your certificate in philosophy. So I started with that one. And of course, that's when I fell in love with Thomas Aquinas, who I knew of, but not to the degree that you introduced him in the new St. Thomas Institute. When I went through that particular course, I learned so many things that just improved the way I could articulate what Catholics believe and why we believe it. And I could do it in a way that could reach somebody who, didn't necessarily believe in God, but I could appeal to them through natural law and through reason. And I really was attracted to that because I'm a reasonable guy, and I already thought you could come to know God through reason alone. You don't have to have divine revelation to know the triune God, that you can't figure out the Trinity on your own, but you can come to know that God exists without that. And then to connect the dots for people and bring them from there. And then, of course, I just went on and I continued one course after the next. I went into theology, did that one next, did apologetics because I was doing apologetics. And then once I finished those three, I had a chance to teach church history at the Catholic school where the story that I'll share later on occurred. And while there, you had three different courses on church history. You had the one on the patristics, you had one on medieval Catholic studies, and then, of course, modern Catholic history. So as I was teaching that, I was earning those certificates and using quite a bit of the material in the class when I was presenting it to the kids. I love the way that you, in a condensed way, share some pretty big ideas about Catholic history and put it in a way that anybody can understand it. And I would build off of that with the kids. And then after that, that's when I really fell into, you asked me how I came upon tradition. The Summer of Shame in 2018, I was following all of that stuff. I'm sad to say that the last time it happened in 2002, I wasn't on the same page with my faith I am right now. So that I kind of missed the brunt of that impact, but I felt it fully in 2018. And I had a very, very deep devotion to Eucharistic adoration and the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist. I saw some of the statistics showing that 70% of people that are Catholic today don't believe in the true presence. I saw some connection between whether it's intentional or not, and whether it's ambiguous or not, some of the abuses that occur in some of the masses where people go that would maybe be a detriment to their belief in the Eucharist. And I'm a seeker of truth, an individual character, and God's servant first, and I will follow truth no matter where it leads me. And I wasn't afraid to be uncomfortable and to read things that maybe challenged where I was at. I was a typical JP2, Benedict XVI, neoconservative Catholic, and I'd never really read a lot of documents prior to Vatican II. And when I was listening to a lot of your podcast and that stuff was unfolding, and then you wrote your book, which I read, Infiltration. I said, I've got to go look at this because like I said, I'm a seeker of truth and I'm going to read it. I'm going to follow no matter where it leads. And I saw some of the ambiguity, some of the difficulty with the hermeneutical continuity. And I started to read it and study it. And I'm still making my way through that. But eventually, I convinced my family, after being selected to be a preview to that documentary on the Latin Mass, Mass of the Ages. Yep. That's how I got my family to accompany me to their first Latin Mass. Mm-hmm. And we've been going now for about, I'd say a little over 2 or 3 months consistently, like you kind of challenge folks to do. Yep. And even though it is kind of confusing at first for them, I wanted to make sure I could follow the Mass in the Missal, or if you subscribe to Benedictus, I use that as well. Right. And I'm teaching my kids and my wife through the Mass. And it's been a beautiful thing. And I'm hoping to get some of my 2 younger kids, hoping to get them sacraments through a diocesan Latin Mass in my diocese. So that's part of my journey to tradition.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I'm glad I want everyone to hear this, that this journey is not just like flipping a switch. It certainly hasn't been for me. It hasn't been for Chad. I think for everybody, it's not that way. It takes time. I've been going to the Latin Mass for 11 years, and there's still, even this morning, I found something in the Missal on today's feast, which is in the tradition, in the 62 Missal. It's the baptism of our Lord Jesus Christ. In the pre-55, it's not called the baptism. And I was like, what? I was shocked. I contacted a traditional priest. And so I'm still learning. There are still things that I'm figuring out. By the way, the quick answer to that is traditionally the propers were about the baptism of Christ. They just finally named it baptism of Christ in the 62 Missal. It's not a big deal. But just always learning, always discovering things, always turning the page. And it requires a great love, and that's a great love for our Lord Jesus Christ and for our neighbors as ourselves, of course. Now, I wanted to go back to one thing that you said, and it reminded me of a common question that I get from people, and that is they say, hey, Taylor, I noticed you ask us to study a philosophy course before we do theology. I just want to study God. I just want to study theology. I think studying with philosophy, why would I want to do that? And the answer is, it's very brief. Well, first of all, it's Catholic tradition to do it that way. Nature, or grace builds on nature. But if you go to any academic, either high school, college, university, the philosophy departments tend to be more conservative than the theology departments. Why is that? Well, there's a lot of crazy nonsense in philosophy departments, but in philosophy departments, you often learn logic. It's a required course. And you often begin in a philosophy 101 by reading Plato and learning about Socrates and the Socratic method. And you read some Aristotle. And so you always begin with how to think and how to reason. And I heard you say that, Chad, about I'm a reasonable guy. I wanted to learn how to think properly, natural law, logic.
Yes.
And there's so many people out there that used to be Common Core in the old days. People took a logic course, always.
Yes.
People watching right now have never taken a logic course. It's not your fault.
No.
You were robbed. And the problem is people jump into theology without ever learning how to think. And when you do that, you get into heresy.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I'm thinking of Matthew 7 when in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about building your house on rock or building it on sand. I know he's speaking about building on the rock of Peter in the church, but also building a rock of the foundation of how you're going to approach that. And philosophy, as you said so aptly, teaches you the process of how to think.
Right.
What we have in education today, I find, which is very disappointing to me, as I know I've heard you speak about many times, is they're teaching people what to think, and they're just accepting it without even questioning the premise for which things are being presented to them. And it makes it very easy to dupe someone if you're just being fed what to think and you haven't been taught a process of how to break that down and analyze it and compare what is subjectively attached to you in your emotions compared to an objective reality. I've had many things in my life, including things within the faith, that I had to come to terms with that I may have had an emotional attachment to. But I understood God was outside of me and that truth was going to be there before it was here before I got here, and it'll be there after I'm gone. It was up to me to conform my life to that. And you have to be convicted and have a love of Christ, because ultimately that's not following a rule. That's choosing to love God more than you love the thing that you're attached to. And that's what that relationship is all about. And philosophy to me has been the key to understanding theology in a sound and a direct and precise way, and being able to communicate it that way.
Yes. And then so, you'd said that your journey kind of began with apologetics. Apologetics is not apologizing for Catholicism, it's defending Catholicism. And then a lot of people, I think when they hear, I'm going to do apologetics, they run into, I am going to learn the proof texts, which is the footnotes. Like this Bible verse answers this and this. And that's very important. We need to do that. I mean, I have a whole Bible cheat sheet that I tell people to carry around with them and use, right? But being skillful and being convincing and being confident also comes with learning to think properly, learning logic, learning fallacies. And I think stressing that at the beginning, whether it's in high school, college, or if you're going to go to New St. Thomas Institute like Chad did, and starting with that philosophy, I know it's not as, it's not as sweet, it's not as much candy, but it builds that basis to think properly. And on this podcast, when I'm talking and I'm going through things like we did yesterday, or the day when we were talking, analyzing Cardinal Supich's speech, or going through arguments that are going in our government, we're breaking down arguments and doing syllogisms. That's convincing. That's powerful. People think it's interesting because they don't hear it. They don't see it. So we have to learn it. One more thing I want to ask you on a question, kind of a follow-up on what you just said. Your family, teaching your family through the Mass. I am going to say something that may shock people, and that is I talk to a lot of people coming into the tradition, and one of the most common ones is, guys, I'm loving it. I love the TLM. My wife's not a big fan. Has that been your experience?
Maybe I'm an anomaly when it comes to that, but I think I'm just on the opposite end of that. Good. My wife is very docile. I think she lives out Ephesians 5 the way it should be lived out when we talk about it. She trusts me and trusts what I'm saying. Of course, she trusts my integrity of my study and my knowledge, and she knows I don't jump to conclusions or just lead them down a path that I haven't first tested the water to see if it was valid to go down myself. Right. I started bringing her and the kids, and I explained to her some of the history behind what a lot of people on the outside of the church looking in who don't follow this stuff as closely as probably most of the people that watch your program do, about some of the tensions and the things within the church. And of course, in the last few years, the Lord has given me a privilege to be able to see that up close, inside, and personal. And I can verify that, if you're aware of it, you can see it. And when I brought her in and started explaining to her, because my wife loves Jesus in the Eucharist too, and so do my children. When I started to explain that this was really about the Latin Mass is about God. It's not about us. And we're going there to respond to the love that God gave to us. And I always tell anybody I'm in front of that that ultimate act of love that God gave on the cross, it demands a response. And not responding is a response.
I
And
like that.
this is the greatest response we can give, is to go and in the highest form of worship, to adore in a fear of God. Not I'm afraid of him, but I'm in awe of his power, his might, and his goodness, and to give him proper worship. And the deeper I go into my faith, the more I spend time in front of the Eucharist, and the more I bring my family to the Mass and just walk them through a basic explanation, the more they want to go. In fact, one Sunday I had to attend a different parish for something I do for work, and I had to give a presentation. And my wife took the kids on her own, which I thought was pretty bold. And I was excited that she did that. And I had to go to the Mass at the parish I was at, and I missed that weekend, and I was upset because I couldn't go. It really, once you start going, like you said, and you get used to going, you're desiring to go to the Latin Mass. If I've given, I mean, like I said a few minutes ago, I'm not going to tell people where to go to Mass. I'm just not at that point yet. But if I have a choice and I have a TLM, I'm going to the TLM.
For sure. For sure. Could you speak, Chad, about, you mentioned it before, and we've talked about it before, but the love of Christ in the Eucharist.
Yes.
I think for most people, that's how they find their way in tradition, because they see a host dropped on the ground, they see a chalice spilled, they see a priest changing the Mass. So there's sort of this shock, this horror of, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is happening in God's church. And then they begin to search, read, try something new. And that's kind of the path. Can you talk about how your love for the Eucharist led you to seek more of a traditional expression?
Absolutely. And just a caveat to what you were just saying, I happen to live in a very conservative diocese, and we don't have a lot of the abuses that I frequently see on the internet or when I'm looking around. So it wasn't necessarily that there wasn't reverence in the Mass for it. It was just I couldn't handle any more lay people giving out communion once I had read some books by Bishop Athanasius Schneider and looked in more deeply into the teaching on the Eucharist and understanding the indult, where receiving in the hand came from. It was just out of an extraordinary love for Christ in the Eucharist that led me to say, I'm not receiving on my hand anymore. I'm going to receive on my tongue. I have a son who's a lifelong paraplegic. We're going to talk about him later on in the show. He's always received on the tongue because he doesn't have a lot of dexterity in his hands, and I never wanted him to drop the Eucharist and commit a sacrilege. So I eventually said, look, you're going to receive on the tongue. And to be in, before I had this epiphany, so to speak, of all this stuff in a deeper way, to be in union with him, I was going to receive on the tongue. So I was always receiving on the tongue standing. But then when I read and looked more into it, because I wanted to honor the Lord with the greatest expression of love and awe for transubstantiation, for his true presence in the Eucharist, I began wanting to receive kneeling. And of course, that spread down to my whole family. And the reverence of the traditional Latin Mass, the beauty, I've looked at like you said, I've looked into the canon, the canon of the Mass when they were praying, the offertory prayer. It is a propitiatory sacrifice.
Yes.
You can't get around that.
Right.
In the TLM. It's just subliminally, it's oozing from that. And I feel like some of that is lost on some folks, and that might be a reason why some of them don't see the true presence in the other form of the Mass. But I think if it's taught well and done right, it's possible. But I still think, like I said, the best place to really bring your family to the fullness of that is to just have them come and experience. We went to the Christmas Mass this past Christmas for the first time. I didn't get to go at midnight, but I did go to the one at 11 o'clock on Christmas Day. And they had the full-blown choir. They had the chant. It was the most beautiful Mass I've ever been to. It was amazing. I mean, I was speechless.
We should be. Let's pivot and talk about Eli. And this is your passion. You know, the title of this video is not just about sacred tradition, it's about fatherhood. And, you know, today people think, oh, patriarchy is so bad, you know, rule of the father, oh, we must destroy it. But true fatherhood, true masculinity is power, it's strength, it's danger, united to love and sacrifice. That's what I say. It's all the strength of masculinity, but it's serving a sacrifice. That's what we see, of course, with the Holy Trinity. And that's what I see in your life, Chad. So can you tell us about your son and just the journey you've been on with him, with your wife and the family?
Absolutely. So I've recorded this complete journey in 3 separate books. I'll give a little synopsis of the bigger picture of the story. When I said at the beginning of the program that something happened in my life that brought me to a radical reversion or conversion to the faith, in May of 2005, one of my former students asked me a question I'd never been asked before. He said, "Hey, Coach Judice, what's your greatest fear?" And I told him my greatest fear to be to have a child with a mental or physical handicap because I was such a perfectionist. I didn't think I'd handle that very well. And I finished up my time at that school, moved on to the school where this story took place, and I never gave that statement a second thought, having no idea that in 4 short years, my greatest fear would become my reality. In the midst of our second pregnancy, a 16-week ultrasound revealed to my wife and I that our second child was diagnosed with a birth defect so severe that 80% of the couples who received that diagnosis at that point in the pregnancy choose abortion.
Yeah.
And we chose to pray for a miracle. Now, I know that, maybe your audience is sitting there and, it is January. We're about to have the celebration of the anniversary of Roe versus Wade. I've actually been a speaker at the request of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. I don't know if it was when you were working back then or not. It was back in 2014
No,
when I went.
I don't. Actually, I think I was at that march. I think I was. So I heard you back then.
I told his story at St. Matthew's Cathedral, and it's not just a pro-life story to me, or another story about a little boy with a disability who overcame all kind of odds. To me, it really hits on one of the theological things that has solidified my conviction in Catholicism. It's about redemptive suffering.
Yeah.
And, I tell people all the time, look, if you don't have a child with a special need, everybody right now, especially what's going on in the world, is dealing with something, right? So just take whatever it is you're dealing with and put it in the place of my son. And you're going to relate to every single thing you're reading or hearing me say when I give that presentation. And, he has defied the odds. We had a lot of little miracles along the way, little signs that God was with us. God showed me he doesn't take our suffering away from us, but he does promise to be with us every step of the way through it. It enhanced my devotion to the Blessed Mother when I was scared. And, when you're fearful, you have trouble seeing things with the eyes of faith, and it tests your faith. But I ran to the Rosary. People rallied around me in the Rosary, prayed the Rosary with me, prayed and prayed and prayed. And, my son can do things that medical science said he wouldn't be able to do. And for a long time, I really thought that was the miracle. But as I've grown deeper into it, I realized that my son was never the one. He is paralyzed physically, but he was never the one paralyzed in his faith. I was. And that God had not sent me that child so that I could take care of him so much as God the Father could take care of me. Because I struggle with perfection and control. And I have to wake up every day as a dad and embrace this very challenging situation where I have somebody who has beat the odds intellectually, but physically can't do 90% of what you and I do for ourselves. And when I get off of work and I go home, my real job starts because I got to provide care for him in the evening because nobody else can anymore. And it's taught me a selflessness. It's taught me the love of the cross, the total, free, fruitful, and faithful love of Jesus Christ that he gave to us. And that what you said, grace does build on nature, because I know in my nature, especially my fallen nature, outside of sanctifying grace, I cannot be that guy. I can't be his dad. So I go to the Lord every day. That's why I love the Eucharist. That's why I've eventually ended up at the TLM, because I need to solidify my faith and my family's faith and to lead as the high priest of the home. And it really has trickled down to my family. One quick story. You love the Rosary. My 16-year-old son, he was about 3.5 when this happened. And if you read the first book, I dedicated this book to him because one day I wanted him to look at it as a young man like he is now, maybe in his 20s, or as a father one day from different perspectives. He witnessed this conversion. He witnessed this daily ascent and relentless pursuit of truth in Christ, and focusing your whole life around that and building your life around that and not the other way around. And I prayed the Rosary with him every morning on the way to school. And he got to be a freshman in high school. And I got in the car. And the first morning in high school, before I could pick up the Rosary, he looked at me and he said, "Dad, we're going to pray the Rosary, right?" And I almost started crying. Yeah. I was like, "Yeah, we're going to pray the Rosary." And, it's statistically proven that if the man has the conversion in the home, there's at least a 90% chance that the rest of the family will continue to practice their faith. And it drops to 15% when the man is effeminate, not feminine, but doesn't, he's addicted to pleasure, doesn't want to do the difficult things he has to do to lead his family and serve his wife the way he's been called to do that. And the woman is tempted in her fallen nature to usurp his authority at the home. Yep. And this ends up inverting what God had revealed as necessary.
It's
the
all
domestic
in
church
Genesis.
is dead.
It's all in Genesis.
If you don't do that. For me as a father and my journey to this point, that's for me to sum it up the best way I can. It is possible. And you just need a wife who, through time, has humility and understands that this is not her role. Mm-hmm. She has one. And if she does it right and you do your role right, the house is going to be a completely different place. And it is now.
It is. And, one thing, even with Joy, and we have these things where we disagree. Believe it or not, my wife disagrees with me sometimes. I just say, hey, it's on me.
Yeah.
If it goes bad, if it goes wrong, a total disaster, it's all on me. 100%. Just trustful surrender, but I'll take 100% of the blame.
Yes.
So I'm going to lead on this one.
Yep.
And I think that does bring a certain amount of freedom, not that it would take away fear on something that's, you disagree on or is a major family change or a family decision or financial decision on things,
sure.
Which do happen. And I think also a woman, when she sees her husband living with strength, but also with the sacrifice, like we talked about yesterday, acta non verbo, action not words. Yes. That just banks a ton of trust and a ton of credit. And I saw someone in the comments as you were talking, they said, oh, the patriarchy's abused its power. Yes, that happens. You take all the strength, all the power that a man has, all the energy that a man has, and if he uses it for pleasure,
right,
it's a total corruption. It's a total abuse. But if he uses it for sacrifice, to build something, to pass something on, to defend, to protect, like you do with your little boy, I mean, that's one of the most beautiful things, because all you're doing is just reverberating and echoing the life of the Trinity in this world.
Yes, and I was speaking to some folks yesterday, and I told them that this is not misogynistic. This is the way God set it up. It's through natural law. Yeah. If we follow that, we're going to find the way to truth. And it's not about me controlling my family. It's never been that. It's about them trusting in me the way that I'm supposed to be trusting in God to lead me to heaven, and I got to lead them to heaven. And, I lead in spiritual matters, and that's where I'm supposed to lead. And if I can lead there and I do that effectively, then my wife is going to have confidence I can lead in other places in my life as well. But it's got to start there.
Yeah. Tell us about Eli's faith.
Eli's faith is pretty amazing. He's going to be 13 in February. He's in 6th grade. He was supposed to be very mentally disabled. He's not. He's on average in part, and in the way he achieves in school. He's a happy little soul. He's innocent, and he's growing in his faith. He wants to make his confirmation. Mm-hmm. He wants to go to Mass. And he really does impact the faith of everybody he encounters. We've had 4 or 5 young men from our fraternity be caregivers for him, because my wife is a neonatal intensive care unit nurse. She's done that for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And so we have help. And I can see the impact he has had on those young men. And it's given me a chance to evangelize and minister to them. And a lot of them are on the verge of getting married. And the 3rd book I wrote for that audience, because I went back to where I was from my first child and how this whole thing changed my life and the way I saw myself as a man, a husband, a father, a teacher, and now the leader of my family, and really understanding, dropping the secular understanding of what marriage is all about and embracing the beauty of what has been revealed about that by God.
Yeah. I remember this was before I was a Catholic. I was a Protestant minister before. I was an Anglican priest. I remember seeing a beautiful thing as an Anglican. Of course, I don't believe in Anglican orders or the Anglican sacraments anymore, but I remember seeing a father and a son at church at the communion time. And in communion, when we were Anglican, we distributed out a kneeler. It was very traditional. Yes. It wasn't like the Novus Ordo. And I remember seeing this father wheel his son up to the rail, and I had already received and gone back and watched. And it was so beautiful because the father was so tender, and he slowly made the sign of the cross over the child who couldn't make the sign of the cross.
Oh, wow.
And then the child received, and then I think the father put the sign of the cross over the child again. And I remember just how beautiful that was, that Christ was, well, again, it's kind of here I am kind of being a little bit ecumenical, but just Christ active in the soul of a handicapped child, and then just sort of the extra effort and time of the father with the son is very beautiful. And when I hear you talk about your son, I remember that memory and that impact that it made on me. I mean, is that how your son received communion? Can you sent a picture to me?
I did.
Can you explain?
Sure. So he sits in his wheelchair and he rolls up. Even at the TLM, the priest will open the gate and come out of the sanctuary, and he always receives on his tongue. Yep. And the picture I sent you was actually of his first communion, which was made years ago.
It's on the screen; people can see it.
But he receives like that every time. And like I said at first, earlier we were speaking, I did it when I wasn't as in tune on what happened with the indult for communion in the hand. I hadn't studied all that yet. I just wanted to be in a consolidarity with my son. I wanted to be consolidated with him. So I would walk up and receive standing on the tongue. And then as my knowledge, my understanding, and my study grew, and my love for the Eucharist grows, it's not a show. It's not, it's not being overtly pious. I'm doing it because it's what God requires, but because I truly want to honor God in the gift he's given to me in himself. And my son, his whole life, it oozes selflessness. It draws you out of yourself, and everybody who gets to know him experiences that. And you are right. God can use the disability of someone as an instrument to bring other people to himself in a way that none of us, that we all have disabilities, right? I mean, mine are invisible. My son's you just can see. Yeah. But it's the most powerful thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It really is.
So I assume that when he goes to communion, you wheel him up.
I do.
And then the priest comes out.
He does.
And this is actually, I'm glad you mentioned this, Chad, because I get this question from people, especially elderly people who are coming back to the Latin Mass, and they say, I'm afraid to go because I can't use the kneeler and I'm not going to be able to receive communion. And that's definitely not the case. I was at Mass just the other day. I saw someone come up in a wheelchair, and the priest comes out of the altar rail and gives you communion in your wheelchair. I've seen people come up with walkers.
Yep.
They just stand at the rail and lean forward with their tongue out. I've seen people without walkers who can't kneel. Yep. They go to the rail, they put their hands on the rail, and they lean forward, and the altar boy puts the paten under their chin, and they receive. So just because you can't kneel, don't worry. It's not required. No one's going to wave their finger at you. This happens all the time. But so in the picture, I'm looking at the picture, Chad. It looks like he's leaning forward, so he has that mobility.
He does.
Yeah.
He does. Most of his paralysis is from the waist down. He does have a lot of mobility in his upper body. He has spina bifida. It's a neural tube defect that occurs in the first 6 weeks of pregnancy. It literally means open spine, and he has the most severe form of it.
Okay.
And if you read the books or go to my YouTube page or something and see some of my talks, I can explain that fully. But he does do PT, so he's gotten a lot stronger in his upper body. He has a lot more flexibility in his chair now that he does that. So yeah, he is mobile. He can lean forward and receive in the chair.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And then the other siblings.
Yes. So I have an older son who's a sophomore in high school, probably around some of the age of some of your older kids. And then I have a younger son beneath him who is 7, and he's about to make his first communion. And I've been working with him at home, preparing him. I'm using the Blessed program from Dynamic Catholic, and I'm working in the Catechism of St. Pius X and the Baltimore Catechism on some things with him as well. So those are a treasure. If you have those, you have to use them. They're great.
Well, I was, when I went and read the Catechism of the Council of Trent for the first time, I was so shocked that it explicitly states that it is the role of the father and the pastor to get the child approved for sacraments.
Wow.
I
didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, it says
I learned something new today.
It says it there. And I was just like, how refreshing. I know that's always in my mind how it should be, but the fact that the Catechism of the Council of Trent states that, that it's really the role of the father and the local pastor to get the child prepared and passed, not a committee, not a group, not a bunch of lay people, but the man who has biological authority over the child, the dad, and the man who has spiritual authority over the child, the pastor, work in synergy, grace building upon nature to prepare the child for the sacrament. What if that were actually the case in the Catholic Church?
That would be ideal.
Right. You can't just drop your kids off to get the sacraments. I had lunch, Chad, yesterday with a fraternity of St. Peter, great priest, young guy. Just I loved hearing him. He just talked about mental prayer and Jesus Christ and the Eucharist and talking with Christ, and you could tell this guy just lives with Christ, and that the traditional Latin Mass and traditional sacraments are just the best vehicles for that. So it's just it's a great blend. It's what it should be, right? Of saints in love with Christ, talking with Christ, living in this traditional ethos and patrimony. But he kind of reminded me that our priests need to be holy men, and there is a certain kind of practicality about him. We were talking about what's going on in the church and, Traditionis Custodes and losing the Latin Mass and all that. And, it was just a reminder that the whole point of the Mass and all that is to get us in conversation, loving Christ, speaking with Christ, spending half an hour every day communicating with Christ, the life of the Trinity, doing that. And they can take away so much from us. And so many saints, you mentioned St. Isaac Jogues and others, they lost the Mass for a time. They didn't have access to sacraments, and yet they continued to grow and become great saints. And of course, we don't want to do the extreme of that, which is Protestants say, well, you don't need the sacraments at all.
Right.
But it's just a good reminder that all of this is ultimately to make us holy, to make us patient, to make us saints, to fill us with grace. And I think it's obviously something in your life and in your family, and it's a beautiful thing.
It is. And before we started, I know you talked about maybe talking about the role of suffering a little bit. I'd just like to say a couple of things about that. I have 3 punchlines that people ask me about suffering and why I thought it was so valuable. I know Padre Pio talked about if we knew how valuable it was, we'd ask for more of it. For me in my life, it showed me that he was God and I was not. I needed that when it happened. It's purified me. And undoubtedly, if you look at this story from start to finish, especially where I am now in my faith journey, it has definitely brought about a greater good. And those are philosophical arguments for, proving why an all-loving God in his permissive will would allow suffering. Yeah. And Christ wants us to experience everything in our humanity he did in his, so we can become more like him, other saints in the world. And I am where I am today, not in spite of my circumstances, but because of them.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that every day.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say to people who, there's 2 groups of people in my mind. The first group would be, there's a lot of young people I've noticed, Chad, that are in their early to mid 20s. They're even Catholic, but they're horrified of getting married and having kids. A lot of it is their parents are divorced. They had dysfunctional homes, bad situation, and they know it's going to be suffering. And they hear people like us say, yes, there's going to be suffering involved in it. And they're like, I'm not going to do that. So that's one group I'd like you to speak to, maybe. And then the second group is people who know that they need something more. And is it just becoming more patient and loving, or do you actually need to do all this stuff like rosaries and Latin masses and all that? So maybe that's two phases.
Okay, so let's start with the younger folks first. It's ironic you asked that because I mentioned a while ago we have young people that give us aid in our home. One of them that happens to be helping us right now.
Okay.
Outstanding young man, comes from a wholeheartedly Catholic home. He's got 6 siblings. He's one of the younger ones. Amazing guy. I'm getting to walk with him and getting to know him in a deeper way. And he's asking a lot of questions. He has a serious girlfriend that he's thinking about getting married to, and he's asking my wife a lot of questions too. And I would say I got married at 23. I don't know how old you were whenever you guys
23,
got married.
And my wife was 22.
So I've been married almost 20 years now. And to me, I think it's a mistake to wait because, you should still be courting someone when you're married to them.
Yes, and still doing it today.
You got to, it's going to get, it's not going to be the same as it was when it first started all the time, but you're going to have moments of that and you have to embrace that. Don't be afraid of that. I mean, it's the most beautiful thing. And, to me, running around and dating, I did all that before I got married, and it's just not what it's cracked up to be. And if I'd have known what I know now and I could tap myself back on the shoulder, I'd have done things a lot differently. And I still would have probably married the same person that I married. And I'm glad that God brought her in my life. But don't be afraid to make that commitment early on in a journey together through that, because if marriage leads you to holiness, then you're going to sanctify one another, but you got to have the sacrament working in your life in order for that to happen. So putting it off is a bad idea. Even bringing in kids to the world is, don't wait to do that. They're such a gift. It just takes time to realize the kind of gift that they are. But once you start that journey and you grow from it, you can't regret it. It's just, kids are amazing. Don't be afraid to make commitments. I think, if you wait too long, you're missing out on the growing part together. And that's been the best part of my marriage. Would you say that for you and your wife as well?
Yeah, I mean, well, the fun times are always great, but there's that element. It's just sort of like, it would be like someone saying, well, I know like working out or exercise is good for me, but I'm going to get out of breath and sweaty and be sore the next day. And it's like, yes, you are. Right. But there are so many other benefits to it, like having a fresh mind, sleeping well, yes. Being in better shape, having, more strength to run around with the kids and play. I mean, there's all these other things. And it's like, yes, there is definitely going to be sacrifice, pain. You will have hard years and you'll have great years, hopefully more great years. But yeah, I mean, choosing what seems to be easy isn't always the best. Running a marathon is hard, but it's a great achievement. And no one at, the very last mile is like, this feels great. This is just, it's when you cross the finish line. And, or it's kind of, St. Paul uses the analogy of a woman giving birth.
Yes.
There's all this travail and struggle, but when you see that baby, it's awesome.
It's
worth it. I think, how many, I've heard we have 8 kids. Believe it or not, today is the birthday of my twins. They turned 18 today.
Oh, wow.
Can't believe it. Taking them out to dinner tonight, my wife and I. But several times, I don't know how many times, but I remember my wife, all the struggle. We had 3 or 4 kids at home, no drugs, all natural. And as soon as the baby's born, I remember at least twice she said, I want to have another baby. And I'm thinking, man, that wouldn't have been my response after everything I just witnessed right now, but good. And that's life.
It is. Nothing in life that's worth anything is easy. And to kind of quote Archbishop Fulton Sheen, you can't have an Easter Sunday in your life without a Good Friday. So might as well embrace the cross with Jesus, because without it, it's pretty miserable.
and the other option of like joining the religious life, I think that's another problem, is religious life became soft. It became easy. It became sort of like living in a pretty nice apartment complex with other bachelors after Vatican II. And that just turned into a bad situation. The religious life, you read like St. Bede of what the monks in Scotland and England and Ireland were doing to evangelize. Those guys were suffering and living. They were like athletes for the Catholic faith. There's a strenuous effort that goes into it, carrying the cross, fighting the good fight. So I would tell, you already said it, young people, just do it, get in there. Yeah, you're going to suffer.
But it's going to be beautiful. And, you talked about exercise, and I'm like you, I work out, I swim, I do all that stuff. And it's important to be able to be active, to be around, especially when you have younger kids. But, you get a dopamine rush when you get through working out. Same thing happens in marriage. All the low points, they make the high points worth being there for. And it's what strengthens the kind of reciprocal self-giving love that you're giving to one another, and that Christ is right in the middle of. It's going to lead to your total fulfillment, on this side of heaven. Ultimately, our fulfillment's with God in heaven, but it's going to be the closest thing you're going to get to that this side of heaven in a fallen world. So
I like that.
Don't wait.
Fulfillment.
Yeah, don't
Does
wait.
anyone really out there believe they're going to find fulfillment in this life and that it will be painless and without suffering?
No.
Could anyone really believe that?
No, I don't think.
It's impossible. Mm-hmm. All right, and then what do you say to all the people who are like, I want this, I need this joy, I need this fulfillment in my life, but do I really need all this like traditional stuff?
Oh, I would say that when people ask me how I do this every day, when they look at the totality and the reality of my situation, I can't do it without. I got to pray a rosary every morning on the way to work. I got to go to adoration. I'm very fortunate. Right next to where I work, there's a place I can go to adoration every day. And I got to have that time for mental prayer and time set aside for God, especially if I'm going to get up in front of people and share the deposit of
I
faith, which is
agree.
part of my
Yeah.
job. They don't need me, they need Jesus. And I better fill myself with him as much as I possibly can before I do that. This is the Eucharist, the sacramental life. Jesus instituted them for a reason. It's to take us from the desert into the promised land. Just like he led the Israelites out of Egypt into the desert and into the promised land. You need the manna, man, from heaven every day. I can't do that. I can't speak for anybody else. I know I could not do what I've been asked to do without that. It is, to me, it's an absolutely essential part of my life now. I can't imagine my life or trying to do what I have to do every day, which is most of the time, one moment at a time, without it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. You need that fuel. I mean, I have the same thought. I'm like, I'm going to go and talk to these people on YouTube, or if I'm going to go to an event and I'm going to speak, I always feel like, man, I need to charge up. Like, yeah. Like you can't fake it. You can't get in front of people and fake it. Like you have to really try to get our Lord to fill up the well of grace so that you can at least give someone a drink.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a non-negotiable for me. I got to have it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Chad, you got 3 books. The first one is Waiting for Eli. Second one is
Eli's Reach on the Value of Human Life and the Power of Prayer. And then the third one is Growing with Eli, Our Journey into Life and Light. The first book is the journey from the pregnancy to the birth of my son. The second book is when I started sharing the story, how it entered into people's lives when they were in the midst of immense suffering, and how when they encountered the story, it completely changed the way that they perceived it, and it changed their faith journey in it. So it's really about how his life has impacted other people. I told their stories.
Yeah.
And the third book is my journey as a husband, a man, a father, and goes back to where I was at before I had my first son, and how it radically transformed my marriage, transformed my life, and has led me to the place where the Lord has me today. And I felt like once I had encapsulated those 3 aspects of the story is the first book, the story behind the story is the third book, and the impact of the story is the second book. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's it.
Good. Well, I put a link below this video if y'all want to get those books. You can go to Chad's website, and then Chad also has a YouTube channel where he records videos. It's your name, right?
It is, and it's growing. It's and really I set it up to address the 4 big reasons why people leave the church.
Good.
They don't see the existence of God. They can't see the compatibility of faith and science. The big one is why all loving God allows suffering, and then some people are confused about the natural law, and the reason why I think they have a reductionist view of the human person. They're defining their humanity based on their sexuality, and I just think that's a misinterpretation of the human person, and that people are made for more than that. So I make some natural law arguments and some theological arguments for that on that channel.
Yeah, I mean, when you deny that what makes you human and gives you meaning is that you're in the image and likeness of God with an intellect and a free will, when you deny that, you're off to the races on trying to figure out what defines you. And it seems in the last 2 to 5 years, sexuality is what people have turned to. Well, I'm an L, well, I'm a B, right, I'm a Q, I'm a T, I'm a this, that, mixed with this. And we all know that that's not the fulfillment. It's not it.
No, because we're made for union with God, and we're only going to find our fulfillment ultimately in Him. Not even with any other person, even our spouse, as great as they are, is not going to give us the fulfillment.
Or
God
whatever
is. So,
weird combination.
No, right.
You're trying.
And just for people to know, my son has had 5 brain operations in 12 years of his life, and throughout the duration of my speaking and public ministry, everything that I've received has always gone to supplement all of his lifelong medical expenses. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Beautiful. Well, Chad, I mean, thanks for coming on. I just wanted to showcase a man who's a Catholic, who loves tradition, who loves studying Catholicism and our history and our scriptures, our tradition, but also lives it. Let people know what is possible, and to live a life of sacrifice and a little bit of struggle, but ultimately the meaning, the fulfillment that you express. So thanks so much for coming on and sharing that.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So everybody go check out Chad Judice YouTube channel. I got the link below if you want to look at his site, look at his books. If you want to join New St. Thomas Institute and take the courses he was talking about, you can do that at newstthomas.com. There are 9 courses in there. There's philosophy, theology, apologetics, church fathers, medieval, modern. Help me out, Chad. Old Testament, New Testament, and
you got the history of the Roman Rite, right?
Yeah, Latin Mass
history of the Roman Rite. That was great.
So they're kind of all based to be 6 months to a year, but some people do them a lot faster. Chad's one of those guys, and there's all kinds of resources in there if you're interested in that. So check that out at newstthomas.com. You heard Chad say it himself. Pray the Rosary every day. If you don't pray the Rosary, you're not on the team, right, Chad?
That's right.
I got to tell y'all, there's so much joy and consolation. A lot of people, they want to eat a bunch of sweets or pizzas or cakes or something to chill or get away. To me, it's the Rosary. Like if I'm stressed out, where are my beads? Oh,
I'm going to pray them.
Yeah. I need another Rosary. To me, it is just there. It's supernatural. I want to say, man, it's like a brain chemistry thing. It's not. It's grace. If I can't sleep at night, Rosary. I can't tell you how many times I wake up and there's beads in the bed next to me because I woke up in the middle of the night, was thinking about something. I just know what to do. I reach over, grab my beads, and I'm probably a decade or less, or maybe, decade or less, because I'm just in the arms of Our Lady. So praying the Rosary is just a great thing. It's the Bible on beads, so do that. If you like this video, hit the like button. Share it with your friends. If you were moved, share it on Facebook. And if you're new, please hit the subscribe button and hit the bell. And make sure you subscribe over at Chad's YouTube channel as well. I went over there and looked at it. There's some good stuff over there, especially on the science and all that. So check that out. All right. Well, thanks so much, Chad, for being here. Appreciate your witness. Sure. And everyone, please pray for him. Also, I'd ask if you could please pray for my teenage daughters who turned 18. Yes. They're lovely girls. They're devout. They love the Mass. They're reading good books. I'm just so proud of them. I couldn't be more proud of my daughters. So if you would, please give them a gift of praying a Hail Mary for them on their birthday. I would appreciate that. And until next time, remember, our Lord Jesus Christ is the light of the world and the salt of the earth. So go out there and be salty. God bless. Godspeed. Chad, thanks so much.
Thank you.